Welcome back to the Communication Mastery Podcast with me, Mark Berlinson. This is where we unleash the power of understanding to build bridges and not boxes, because we understand that communication is the soil in which teamwork grows. Especially in the business world, it's so essential that we build strong teams, particularly when we get to the topic we're going to talk about this week, which is communicating in a crisis. Here in South Carolina, we often have to take note of the hurricanes that come through. Thankfully, we haven't had any direct hits for a while now, but we've still had a few near misses, and you have to be ready for the crisis when it comes. And it's the same in business, isn't it? Every business will have times where there is a crisis, when stuff comes along that wasn't part of the plan, that wasn't expected, or that threatens the very mission or values of your organization. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about communicating in a crisis time. Because when a storm hits, communication is essential. And effective communication is crucial for managing that situation as best you can. It may be out of your control, but the way you communicate and some of the things that you focus on while you're communicating can make all the difference between success and failure when the pressure's really on. And so I've got, I think, 10 different points that I wanted just to pass on to you that would be valuable if you're facing a crisis or when you face a crisis in your business. The first one is that you need to communicate with clarity and simplicity. You've got to be as clear as you can, but you've also got to keep it as simple as you can, because in a crisis, people are not usually prepared to listen at length to complex explanations, complex arguments, and those kinds of things. So clear, concise language is very important. Ensure that the message is very simple, easy to understand, easy to grab hold of. So you prioritize the key information and focus on the most critical facts in whatever the crisis may be. Whatever's happening, you want to tell people what they should do, how they can stay safe if that's applicable, or what are the first steps they can take to react and then respond to the crisis that's coming. The second thing to bear in mind is timeliness, because when a crisis hits, time is of the essence. So there needs to be immediate communication. And when I say immediate, I don't mean just literally jump straight in and say the first thing that comes off the top of your head. What I'm saying is take as little time as you can to prepare a clear and simple message into the setting, even if it's to say, we don't have all the answers yet, but this is what we do know. Because the sooner that you can communicate with those who are affected by the crisis, the more they're going to be able to listen to you, and the more reassuring you can be, which will help them to prepare for whatever else is coming. People need to know what's happening as soon as possible, but also they need regular updates. And so if you can provide regular updates in the dynamic situation that a crisis naturally is. It's changing moment by moment, but if you provide updates as you go along, even if they contradict what you've said before, you're keeping people in the loop, and that timeliness, even in times of rapid change, provides those frequent updates that can keep people engaged and ensure that they have the most up-to-date information. The third thing to bear in mind is to have transparency and honesty in your communication. So be honest about what you do know, but also be honest about what you don't know. At all costs, avoid speculation or misinformation, because if there's uncertainty, we need to acknowledge it, but then provide what facts are available. People will be reassured if you say, we don't know the whole of this picture, but this is what we do know. This, number one, this, number two, this, number three, and the rest we don't know yet, but we'll tell you as soon as we can. So if you explain the actions you're taking with as much clarity as you can muster, but also share the steps that are being taken or planned to address whatever the crisis looks like. Of course, those steps will be different depending on the source or the cause of the crisis, but people want to know what's being done to mitigate the situation and what's being done to protect people's safety and security as they navigate the crisis with you. The fourth part that is essential in crisis communication is to have empathy and compassion for the people who are affected. We need to acknowledge our emotions. We need to understand the emotions that people may be feeling. And that's a particularly important point if you're the kind of person who tends to run into a crisis and have the courage to address it. you may need others around you who can bring the empathy component to your communication. Or can coach you in what to say and how to say it, in order that as a leader you can lead your people through the crisis, through the challenge, because crises often provoke fear or confusion or stress. And when you express empathy, when you show that you understand those emotions are happening, then you can provide reassurance to show people that you recognize the emotions that are around, the concerns that they have in this crisis, whatever it may be. And where you can, offer hope and remind people that maybe that help is on the way, or remind them that there's a group of qualified people working on a response to this challenge, or that efforts are being made to resolve whatever the situation is. Expressing those kinds of emotional components will be very helpful, because it's an expression of compassion to your hearers, that you understand that this is difficult for them and you care that this is difficult for them. Fifth area that we must focus on in crisis is to be consistent, because we need to keep the mission or the strategy of the organization or the business central to our response. Sometimes I've seen groups in crisis get completely sidetracked from what they're really there for, as they give all their attention to whatever this issue is that's come out of left field to them. But that's not valuable for the mission of your whole organization. So all of my communication in a crisis should align as far as possible with the overall message of my business or my nonprofit or whatever it may be. Because if there are mixed signals, that can lead to confusion. And very often confusion can morph into panic when there's pressure. And so ensure that all the individuals who are providing updates or providing information are reading from the same information, reading from the same playbook, if you like. They're on the same page and conveying the same message. There are several other things that do also help in crisis. And the sixth one I think that would be worth highlighting is to have accessibility to the messaging that you're putting out. So use multiple platforms to reach different audiences: social media, your email list, news outlets giving statements to the press or the TV or whoever. Maybe sending text messages if you have people's numbers, making public announcements. All of these different routes to provide information are valuable because they create accessibility. That means that your messaging is accessible to different groups of your audience. And it's also important, if you have non-English speakers in your audience or in your customer base, that you provide translation or you provide communication for that's accessible to those maybe with disabilities or to people with different levels of literacy. Bear those things in mind, maybe not in the initial hours of the crisis hitting, but certainly within a day or two, to provide a broader spectrum of accessible information so that you make sure that nobody's missed out. Even if it's not applicable to certain of your audience, they will appreciate that you cared enough to make your message available to a wide range of people. Three more to give you, and the next one I think can be easily missed in the pressure of a crisis. We need to provide actionable instructions to people, particularly to your staff or your team, but also to those who have an interest and a care for what it is you're doing, whether it's your business or whether it's the mission of your nonprofit. So tell people what they need to do. Maybe give them emergency contact information, or maybe there's something about evacuation procedures or what to do with your orders while we walk through this crisis. Break down any complicated instructions into smaller, manageable tasks or steps that people can take so that they're easy to follow, because in stressful situations, we all need simple steps to follow. So actionable instructions would be number 7. Number 8 would be that you need to be sure that you're focused on credibility and trustworthiness, so that you're communicating from trusted sources to ensure that the message is credible. An example of this would be here again in South Carolina when there are hurricanes. Everybody locally says, we need to trust what Ed says. He's our local weatherman, and he gives us the facts without hype. He's not focused on producing advertising dollars by making it seem worse than it is, but he's also not in the business of false reassurance, of telling people everything's going to be fine. He just gives us the facts and gives them straight. And that credibility and trustworthiness is a huge value in a crisis situation. So you need to actively combat misinformation, false rumors perhaps, so that you provide factual information and factual updates as regularly as you can as you navigate the crisis. And then ninth would be listening to your audience and giving their feedback into the process of your communication. So enable people to ask questions, particularly if they're core members of your team. Enable them to give feedback, to share concerns as you navigate the crisis together. The worst way to navigate a crisis is by one person being the hero and blocking everybody else out. You need to listen to their needs and adapt your messaging accordingly. But also listen to your hearers in the general public or in your customer base so that you can be flexible and adjust your strategy as you get their feedback and as new information comes available as you navigate through. The situation will evolve, crises always do. And so the way you communicate is going to change over time. And one vital part of that is that you're listening to the feedback you're getting from the people you're speaking to. And then finally, when the crisis passes, post-crisis communication is very important as well. And that would be our 10th point, because you need to communicate about recovery efforts. You need to communicate about the steps that are being taken to prevent maybe a similar event in the future, or to prepare for a similar event if it's something that can't be prevented. So you continue to offer updates to help people to deal with the fallout from the crisis, whatever that crisis may be. If it's a change of leadership in the organization, you need to give them full information on who's in charge now, and also what steps are being taken to recognize and address any issues that were in play before that crisis hit. And so when we continue to offer those updates, but also give the resources to people. So for example, if it's been a leadership change in a business or an organization, one of the resources that the staff may need is access to somebody who's an independent, outside, safe place for them to process their own journey through that crisis, so that you don't keep it all to yourself, but you allow your people to access the resources that are most valuable to them. Post-crisis communication can often mean the difference between growth through crisis and setback through crisis. And so it's well worth having a plan in place ahead of time for what is our post-crisis communication going to look like. So I hope those things have been helpful to you. As you know, your communication mastery really matters to me. And there may be somebody that you've thought of as we've looked at these points who needs to hear them, but maybe doesn't yet subscribe to the podcast. So maybe you could do me a favor and text them right now. Send them a link to today's episode. Or maybe you'd like to give a review if any of this information has been helpful to you. Helpful reviews are always valuable because it helps people who don't know you or me to find this podcast. So thank you for helping me to spread the word. And I hope today's episode has been really helpful to you. If you've got questions out of what we've said or things that we could address in future episodes, remember to drop me a line through my website at markburlinson.com and give me your feedback so that I can address those things in future episodes. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you again next week.